You are listening to the Air Raid Hour with host Judge Mathis, dog, Tilt Money, dog, presented by the fine folks over at the Cover One Sports Network, dogs. Bills Mafia, let's go!
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour, our normal 9 p.m. Monday slot presented by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. And you'll notice that it's me, Tilt, hosting for tonight, but I've got Hansel, our very special co-host, who's joined me many times in Judge's absence tonight in the co-pilot's chair. And that is because Judge right now is at the hospital waiting for his baby girl to be born. So he was sort of pretty much on standby tonight. And so he's there. We're wishing him the best of luck. Hope everything goes well for him. And maybe by tomorrow at this time, he'll be a proud papa. And so we're going to try to do him proud tonight and do a good show for you guys tonight. So Hansel, how are you feeling tonight on this Monday evening?
Yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good. I'm not as probably anxious as Steve is right now, dealing with a baby coming into his life. That's some pretty big news, and good luck to him and congrats to him. It's going to be a long night for him, but we got some news today, which is always good. Got some Bills news, some NFL news, so kind of exciting in the NFL world as well.
Yeah, we got a little lucky last Monday as well. I think last Monday, can't remember exactly what the news was, but there was something that happened that Monday, and we ended up going off the rails a bit on that topic. But obviously, a lot of news to cover today. We got a jam show for you tonight. Obviously, you saw the thumb. Our primary topic going into the day was going to be to talk a little bit about some of our favorite draft prospects that are fits for the Bills at different positions, and we're going to definitely get into that. But because there's been some news today, we're going to kind of do a little bit of a potpourri show tonight, and we'll still cover some draft talk a bit later. But obviously, the big news of the day today was the Bills signed safety Taylor Rapp, a 2019 draft pick of the Rams, 13th graded safety per PFF last year. Obviously, Eric has already done some good work in putting out some film analysis on Rapp. Really good run defending type safety, graded out pretty well in pass coverage as well. Just a solid guy, not like the best athlete necessarily in the world, but just a really solid defender, really kind of typical type of archetype of a player and a safety, especially of someone that Sean McDermott would be interested in. And I think for many, this signing maybe was something that people were maybe interested in. Should Jordan Poyer have not been back in the fold? There was a lot of chatter around Taylor Rapp being a potential replacement for Jordan Poyer, but now as we kind of move our way into the second full week, really now going into the third week of free agency starting today, the Bills signed Taylor Rapp to a 1-year deal and now have him in the mix to be in that safety room. Just some initial reactions from you, Hansel, and comment section, some initial reactions from you as well, and we'll talk about those.
Yeah, so when we were still speculating whether or not Poyer was going to come back, I went through a bunch of safeties to try to see which ones were feasible options. And I saw Taylor Rapp's name, and I like Rapp. I didn't think he was an option. I thought we were priced out at Taylor Rapp. Like, I thought he was going to cost too much for us to be able to kind of bring him in. So the fact that we brought Poyer back and then still were able to bring Rapp in probably under $2 million per Brandon Beane's comments today, that was pretty surprising to me. Like, I had Jabril Peppers as that do-it-all kind of safety that we could bring in and super cheap. We could put him in the box. We could put him deep. We could move him around like thick nickel or dime, big dime, or whatever you want to do. Taylor Rapp's that player. I'm more surprised that Taylor Rapp signed with the Bills than the Bills signing Taylor Rapp. I just really truly believe there had to be better options for him out there. So I'm really intrigued what the Bills said to him in that meeting. Like, hey, you want to come play for us, and here's why you want to come play for us. That's where I'm at right now.
And I'm sorry, I just have to pause for a second because we got a super chat in here from NFL Draft Fanatics. I don't know if this was a fat finger super chat here or not, but I mean, I'm floored right now. I just don't even know what to say. NFL Draft Fanatics comes in and says, special thanks to Judge for the shout out on his page Saturday. And today's also my kid's birthday. Keep up the great work, guys, at Cover One. That is super generous. I don't even know what to say. If that was a fat finger, we'll send you that money back. But if that was for real, we really appreciate that. That means so much to us. And happy birthday to your kid there. And Judge, look, he's going to be a dad. I'm just going to take a minute to just talk about Judge really quick. Judge has, he has his opinions, right? We know on social media he has his opinions. He'll mix it up with people, but that really doesn't take away from, for me, like what he knows about football and what he analyzes and the work that he really puts into doing this show every week, into the draft prep. Look, he knows a lot and he puts a lot of work in. And so, Judge deserves a lot of credit for the success of this show, probably most of the credit, to be honest. And he's always been kind of that guy leading us through all this. And I'm really happy for him to become a dad and kind of go through that experience. And so, NFL Draft Fanatics, thank you so much for this. This is truly amazing. I think it's obviously the biggest super chat we've ever had. And look, if you need anything from us, if you want any kind of shout outs or anything that you need, you let us know and we'll be happy to do that. So thank you so much for that. And so as I transition now to go back to talking about Taylor Rapp, it is quite interesting. And you make a good point about like what was really happening there behind the scenes. The safety market, the way it played out this cycle was very interesting to me. You saw guys like Jesse Bates sign early for the big money in Atlanta, but then there were guys that kind of like floated around for a bit and didn't have a home. Jordan Poyer being one of those, right? And then obviously we saw the surprise with the other big surprise, at least to me, in the safety free agency sort of storylines was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson only signing for $7 million, I believe, for 1 year on a somewhat of a prove it deal with the Detroit Lions. So safety market, Jesse Bates got his bag and then kind of felt like everyone else was going to get theirs, and some did, but some didn't, right? And so it's just interesting how this played out. If I was imagining maybe what that conversation was like, it was maybe Sean McDermott selling it on as Micah Hyde was a good player with the Packers, before he came here, a spot starter, was pretty good. Jordan Poyer had talent, but both of those guys came to the Bills and really, as they say, became the best versions of themselves and became all pros. So if Taylor Rapp's looking at that, thinking, well, maybe I can get on the field this year, maybe it's time for the Bills to start thinking about rotating some of those guys there, like Hyde and Poyer with their age, and like those guys were stalwarts for a long time and not ever coming off the field. But maybe this is a little bit of insurance for that, and a little bit of insurance for, we don't know what the future for Damar Hamlin holds either, right? We would love to see him come back to football. Great that he's healthy now, and it, by all accounts, looks like physically he'd be able to come back. It's probably maybe more of a mental thing for him at this point. But the Bills also may be setting themselves up for something to give themselves insurance, and seeing how that back end really kind of suffered last year with those injuries. So maybe that's part of it. And Taylor Rapp maybe parlaying this into a a longer term deal after this year. But were you surprised? I mean, I know you were surprised that he's signing, but were you surprised that it was also only a 1 year deal?
Yeah, so that was one of the kickers to me in all of this. If Taylor Rapp signed for 2 years, 3 years, then I would be more in line to say, like, okay, this is the plan in the future. Micah is only here for a year more. Maybe the Bills extend him at some point. Poyer's here for technically 2 years, but there's an out next year. So maybe Rapp's the plan in the future. But the 1 year deal is really odd to me, just because there's no guarantee Rapp will be back next year. And from Rapp's perspective, if he doesn't get onto the field at all this year, like let's say he's just relegated behind Poyer and Hyde for the vast majority of the year, and Hyde and Poyer play at an all-pro level, no one hears from Taylor Rapp, he's not going to be able to cash in next year. No one's going to look at him and say, hey, we're going to go pay him big money. So I'm just really intrigued to see how the Bills use Rapp. I have to believe there's more of a plan than he's just the backup safety. Like he's something, there's something else here. And I think we're going to see more of him on the field than the depth chart's going to make it out to be.
Yeah, and I think Eric did a good job starting to break some of that down as well. Pete Nana has a good comment here. It's a good gamble by Rapp. Unlikely he doesn't get some spot starts surrounded by good players, and maybe it's not even necessarily a formality of him being a quote starter, but the snaps that he could play with Sean McDermott now taking over play calling. We're going to segue into that in just a minute, but there is not necessarily like a roadblock for him to get on the field. Like there could be a really good chance of him getting on the field in some form, and really the Bills and Sean McDermott now maybe showing a little bit of growth and evolution and kind of how they want to approach this defense schematically next year with a few more wrinkles. And that's what I'm hopeful of. Right. And I think Greg did a good job of kind of showing what some of these formations could look like with Taylor Rapp on the field at the same time as Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, with Taron Johnson there in the nickel, 6 defensive backs there. Maybe Rapp coming down in certain situations, kind of being that pseudo linebacker. Judge, while he was online earlier today, had started a good conversation with one of the Rams content creators and wanted to get that guy's opinion on what Taylor Rapp really was. And he was like, think of him as kind of like a Mark Barron type player where he's like a kind of hybrid safety linebacker, but has more ball skills than a Mark Barron did. Whereas Mark Barron was really more of like a thumping kind of tackling type tweener. The ball skills weren't necessarily there. So it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how they use him. 1-year deal, a little bit peculiar, but who knows? Like maybe if he does get those snaps in a good defense, he can parlay that into a longer term deal. And maybe that longer term deal ends up being with the Bills as they start kind of maybe looking ahead for their future. So, and NFL Draft Fanatics here says that's a tradable contract. If we draft a safety and performs, we can trade. Maybe that's an interesting thought. But then the other thought is like, why didn't he? He could have signed somewhere else. Like now that we're 2 weeks in, so it's very interesting. And Pete says, I think there's a reasonable chance that Super Bowl win this year would trigger the retirement of Hyde and Poyer. That's also true. And then I think, the Bills could be like, hey, Taylor Rapp, you're our starting free safety now. So speaking of that, I went back and looked at his snap counts over the years. He's predominantly played at free safety per PFF, but he has played a bunch in the box. But it looked like predominantly that he was playing about 2/3 or more of his snaps at free safety, which to me kind of lines up with the fact that Micah Hyde, 1 year left on his deal, maybe he kind of slides in that free safety role beyond 2023. In any case, another good signing by Brandon Beane. And I don't know how much you're into this, but Greg Tomset is this whole comp pick bingo stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I love comp picks.
Not counting against the comp pick bingo because of the salary threshold there. So Beane again playing chess here, it looks like, and said as much today when he spoke to a couple of the beat guys that he's expecting that 3rd round comp pick next year, and he is cognizant and very aware of the moves he's making and how that is affecting that comp pick scenario, and he wants that comp pick. I mean, he said as much. So how important is that comp pick stuff to you? Where do you come out on this whole comp pick stuff?
So I'm all for comp picks, right? We've never seen Beane get one because we've really never had the players in free agency to allow him to get one, right? This year we did in Tremaine Edmunds and theoretically Jordan Poyer. Poyer doesn't sign elsewhere. Tremaine does. So that 3rd round pick's just sitting out there. Picks are going to become more and more important for the Bills over the next 3 years or so. The Bills are really up against the cap. This year, they're really up against the cap. I actually went and peeked at their contracts next year. It's pretty rough. Like they're already technically $30 million over or something like that. So they're going to have to move around money again next year. And these cost controlled players that you get from the draft, whether it be in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd round, wherever, are important. So if the Bills can add another 3rd round pick, that doesn't guarantee he's a player that's going to be a superstar, as a lot of people have realized the draft doesn't always give you superstars, but nonetheless, it gives you a guy that you can have on your roster, one of those 53 players that's at a very low cost that the Bills are going to have to do for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and as Andy says here, all safeties off the Bills draft boards now with only six picks. You would expect that the Bills are not really going to be targeting safety in the draft, and so we'll probably not talk too much about safety tonight as we get later into the show. But yes, with the Rapp signing, this is also an interesting sort of maybe stopping of the conversation of the Christian Benford move to safety as well, which then, on the flip side gives you another quote corner in the room because he's not necessarily going to transition to safety. Now we don't know that, but it certainly would appear that that's not going to happen now with these signings they made. And now you're looking at a cornerback room that has Trey White, Kaiir Elam, Christian Benford, Dane Jackson, and Taron Johnson, obviously at the nickel. And it's looking like a solid corner room now as well. So I don't expect really the Bills to invest heavily in the draft in the defensive backfield at this point. That's not to say they might not, spend a late round pick on a guy, but I'd be really surprised at this point if they spend any kind of early draft capital on a defensive back, which is not the conversation we've had over the last couple years. So speaking of the defensive backfield and speaking of this coaching staff's ability to coach up that defensive backfield, obviously the news came out and was really confirmed today that Sean McDermott will be taking on the play calling duties for the defense in 2023. Now, we've seen him in spot duty take play calling over from Leslie Frazier in certain moments in the past for years. But this is really an interesting development because we kind of assumed this was going to be happening. The Bills didn't hire a replacement defensive coordinator for Leslie Frazier, but now with Sean McDermott calling the plays, a lot of the play callers, right, in the NFL that are head coaches are on the offensive side of the ball, right? Like the Andy Reids and the Zach Taylors and the Sean McVays, right? But it's kind of an interesting one here with the head coach being a defensive guy, now him calling defensive plays. Does that give you any pause that that Sean McDermott's maybe gonna have too much on his plate, or is it going to be more of like, I'm going to now show what I can do with this defense and people can stop sort of questioning this defense, even though it is still very good? Where do you kind of land on the whole, like, is it stretching him too thin, I guess, mindset?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people criticize McDermott for like his game management, right? The use of timeouts, things along those lines. I really don't see that big of an issue. There's a few hiccups here and there, but not any more than other good coaches have had in the past or currently have. So I don't really think that this could necessarily stretch him too thin. I think he has the experience now. He's been a head coach long enough where he knows what he's doing with timeouts. He knows what he's doing in certain situations where calling plays won't necessarily detract from that all that much. I do think that this is basically McDermott's way, at least this season, of saying, all right, I'm getting a lot of criticism and some criticism rightfully so. I'm going to take over what I know and what I do best, and that's the defense. And I'm really optimistic about this, but also hesitantly so. I think Leslie Frazier was very good at what he did, and I think he kind of gets a bad rap for certain things that happened. But Sean McDermott, to me, he's a very talented defensive mind. I actually argue he's the best defensive backs coach in the NFL. There's nobody that makes defensive backs better than Sean McDermott has. He's done it his entire career. He makes superstars out of players that otherwise shouldn't be. I think that alone, just the fact that he's so good in that defensive backfield, that gives me optimism that we won't see a similar situation that we saw in that Bengals game where you have the players 8 yards off the ball on third down. I think McDermott knows enough in those situations to say, hey, you got to press somebody up or you got to do something to make sure that this easy pass doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, and it makes me kind of wonder, like, did he almost go too far the other way with Leslie Frazier at a point where he knows Leslie Frazier is a very well seasoned coach, a very good coach? Did he almost go too much the other way and like not get his hands in fingerprints on that defense as much as he should have in the weeds, so to speak, like in game, like trying to maybe make some changes or like, and just trusting Leslie maybe to a fault to kind of put those guys in position. Like, I'm not saying that's the case, by the way. I'm just saying it's an interesting thought that like at times earlier in the tenure, he would step in, didn't really do that in the last 2 years from what I recall. I think the last time he did it was in 2020 from what I remember. Someone can fact check me on that. But I think this is maybe going to re-energize Sean McDermott a bit too. I think like him feeling like he's got like a more of a direct hand on the defense and not necessarily taking away from what he does in game. Because like, look, at the end of the day, like Sean McDermott is one of the best 5, probably top 5 head coaches in the NFL right now. Like you can make the case that, okay, top 7, like he's up there, right? And like the one knock on him really has been his in-game management decisions in some cases. And so I'm going to be really interested to see like how this defensive philosophy might shift a bit with him kind of taking back the reins, and if there's a little bit more of a change in scheme, signing a guy like Taylor Rapp when it wasn't an obvious need because you already brought back Jordan Poyer, maybe gives a hint as to what may be to come there. So, we got an interesting comment here from Pops say, like, I would like the defense play caller focusing on defense when the offense has the ball, not managing the timeouts, etc. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Is like, how much is it going to take away from sort of that in-game management where we know he has maybe had some struggles in the past. But as John Herring says, he was much better on challenges last year, and he was, right? And we have to remember, like, Sean McDermott, compared to the coaches that he's being compared against now, the Belichicks, the Tomlins, the Pete Carrolls, like the upper echelon, he's the least tenured of all of these guys as far as a head coach is concerned, right? I mean, these guys have been head coaches for years and years. And so, like, in the grand scheme of things, Sean McDermott has been a head coach long compared to the average life of a head coach in the NFL. But compared to the good ones that he's being talked about in the same breath as, he's actually a pretty, he's pretty young in his tenure. So I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic as well, that there's still things that he needs to get better at. Yeah.
And I like that you said he's as a top 5, maybe top 7 head coach. I think a lot of Bills fans kind of forget that very often. A lot of people want to put him down in the bottom 10 head coach, which is just absolute absurdity. I'm not going to go on a giant rant of how good I think Sean McDermott is. There's for sure things he can get better at, but this year, again, I'm pretty excited with the idea that he's taking over more control of the team. You brought up, I think it was 2020 as well, where he last took the control back from Leslie Frazier. I do think he did take his hands out of the honeypot a little bit too much, where he was letting, Leslie Frazier do things maybe he disagreed with. And I think that was probably had a lot to do with the amount of respect he had for Leslie Frazier. He didn't want to step on his toes. Leslie was looking to become a head coach again. That didn't happen. But Sean this year taking over control of everything. Look, either he's going to win a Super Bowl with the Bills, or if he doesn't, he's going to be looked at as a failure of a head coach by a lot of people. This is him saying, I'm taking over this team. This is my team, and I'm going to go try to push this team as far as I possibly can.
Yeah, is there a bit of sense of urgency, you think, from Sean McDermott with a decision like this? I mean, he's putting himself out there, but I also think that he probably also knows that the leash is quite long. He's not really in any huge danger of being on the hot seat. And I know Judge was getting into this with a few people on social media over the last couple of days. It's like, whatever you want to say about Sean McDermott, like, even if for some reason the Bills had a losing season, let's say in 2023, like, he's not going to be on the hot seat unless that happens like for 2 or 3 years in a row, most likely. Right. I mean, like, it's just not. So, like, his seat is very cold, and he has a very long leash. So maybe he is willing now to take a bit more of a chance and have a little bit more of a risk taker's mentality. And not that it's a big risk necessarily, but like more of a sense of urgency, right, from him. So really interesting. So on that note, Sean McDermott, putting his hands on the defense, let's talk a little bit about the offense a little bit. And a lot of the chatter, Sean McDermott getting questioned about Josh Allen and his running style. And, the topic of every offseason seems to be, should Josh Allen run more? Should Josh Allen run less? Should he take fewer hits? Should he slide more? At the end of the day, it's a really nuanced conversation about Josh Allen running, and people are going to be really quick to point out like, oh, like this isn't sustainable. And they're going to say like, look at Cam Newton. We have to remember, like Cam Newton's career didn't end because of like him running. It ended because his shoulder was shot. He can't throw the ball anymore. Josh Allen's injury last year was to his elbow. It wasn't anything to do with him running. So I don't want to see him take shots. I never want to see him take shots. He does take shots. So you also kind of, in my mind, you have to accept some of that when you have Josh Allen as your quarterback. And I know, Hansel, you and I have talked about this before. So what's your stance on sort of his style? Sean McDermott saying he needs to be safer, this type of conversation around Josh Allen's running.
So first I'll say Sean McDermott saying this, there should be no critique of Sean McDermott saying this. And literally any coach in the NFL would say, I need my quarterback not to take as many hits. So I have no issue at all with Sean McDermott saying that. As far as Josh running the ball, look, you're never going to stop him from trying to lay the boom on somebody. That's going to be a part of his game until probably the day he retires, or a point where he gets actually really hurt and he realizes, I can't be doing this at age 33 or something along those lines. But I do want Josh to kind of take a step back and spend more time in the pocket. Having a good offensive line helps that. So bringing in a person like Connor McGovern, maybe drafting a right tackle, maybe that stops Josh from running the ball as much, just because he has more time in the backfield and he has more receivers open down the field. My actual theory on how this should all work is you should tell Josh, or the coaching staff should tell Josh, look, regular season, we're going to win games. You don't need to be running it when we're up by 21 points. If you want to, make sure you're out of bounds, make sure you slide. If you think that you have to, or you think you're trying to evade pressure, just throw the ball away. Just don't get hit. The second the playoffs come, unleash the beast. Like in the playoffs, it should be a different Josh Allen. If he wants to run it every single play because he sees 10 yards he can get, I have no issue with Josh doing that in a win or go home game. But in the regular season, I need him to take a step back. And one final point, because a lot of people bring up the fact that like he got hurt in the pocket. So why are we talking about running? Like he doesn't get hurt when running. I do kind of disagree with that to a point. There was the Patriots game where he got the concussion. That was on a run. Yep. There was the Raiders game when he ran outside the pocket and then tried to make this kind of crazy pass to Stephon Diggs and got rolled up on his shoulder in 2020. That was kind of on a run outside the pocket. So he gets hurt in both cases. And I think that there's some sort of issues on both sides. You need him to protect himself more when he's running the ball. You need the offensive line to protect him more when he's throwing the ball.
No, and that's a good point. I mean, he has taken some shots where I've been like, oh my God, please, I hope he's okay. And like he gets up from so many of these. And, we've been fortunate as fans to watch him get up from some of these big shots he's taken. And he's a big dude, obviously, and he can take a lot of these shots, but it still doesn't make it any easier to see him taking those shots. And like those defenders aren't going to hold anything back, right? Like if they can get a free shot on Josh Allen, they're going to take it, and they're not going to, they're not going to hold anything back. So, it's an interesting conversation. I think that you made some good points about some of the sort of minor injuries he's had from runs. And I guess that comes down to the next point on this conversation around protecting him, right? And it's not necessarily just on runs that we need to think about protecting Josh Allen, but also pass protection, and that he's not running for his life, every other play. And as Randy says here, neglecting to take responsibility for not building an all line that doesn't necessitate him scrambling away from free rushers is kind of, I guess, how we'll segue into kind of the draft talk for tonight, for the last, half hour of the show, and talking about free agency, the culmination of all these signings we've made, really value signings, has kind of put the Bills obviously in better position to attack the draft, not feeling as there is as many holes on this team as there was 2 weeks ago, and there clearly aren't. However, there are still holes on this roster, and I know you do a really good job about putting out sort of the current roster makeup as far as like where the Bills are in relation to that 90 man that they need to bring to camp. So where do the Bills stand right now, roughly around who they've got on the roster, who they've got allocated for draft picks, and like how many spots are we looking at right now?
Yeah, so they have 65 players signed under contract right now. They have 6 draft picks, so you're at 71 there. And on average, they'll sign 9 undrafted free agents. So that puts us at 80. That means they have 10 more spots open, ready for a veteran of some sort. And a lot of that times, those will be camp bodies that have no chance of making the roster. I still think there's a few players like Shaq Lawson, Jordan Phillips, Bobby Hart that you could see the Bills bring in to fill up those 10 spots. But they're really starting to fill in this roster. And actually, I was working on this earlier today. It's now at a point where you have 65 players where I can start kind of moving things around and saying, okay, these are guys that are be on the 53 man. These are guys that are going to be on the practice squad, and these guys are going to get cut. And really, their offensive line, they've done a great job. I mean, there's no superstars on this offensive line, really. Like Deion Dawkins is really good. Mitch Morse is really good. I like the Connor McGovern signing, but then they added all this good depth in like David Edwards. I like Quessenberry back to a point where I'm wondering how much more they can invest into those. I don't think you can ever have too much offensive linemen. So if they drafted one in round 1 or round 2, I'm not surprised. But I'm interested to see how they continue to address that position, or if they really invest much more into it this year.
So let's start with that then, as far as the draft talk. Let's start with the offensive line and some fits that we maybe like for the Bills. Now, as far as I'm concerned, right, I feel like at this point with signing McGovern, signing Edwards, the top of an early draft pick on a guard seems to be maybe off the table. However, that doesn't necessarily mean they wouldn't look at someone, maybe a center, right, early, or a tackle early, right, to give Spencer Brown some competition. So I'm interested to hear from the comments section, right? If you're ranking sort of positional needs for the Bills, where does offensive line fall for you all? I want to hear your opinion. Is it the number one need? Is tackle the number one need for you? And if tackle's not the number one need for you, where do you rank sort of tackle, I guess I'll say, in the list of needs for the Bills right now? I think for me, and I talked about this with Judge a little bit last week, I think for me, it's probably maybe the number 2 need going into the draft. I still think middle linebacker is the highest, but tackle to me, right tackle, bringing someone in that could potentially be a decade-long player for you at the right tackle position when you're still not necessarily sure what you're going to have out of Spencer Brown. I still put tackle pretty far up there as a need for me, and I wouldn't be opposed to the Bills spending a day 1 or day 2 pick on a right tackle. What's your opinion on the tackle position specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty close to that. I think I probably have tackle, or probably right tackle at number 3B or number 3 or 4, somewhere in that range. I have 2 I'd put ahead of that. But I wouldn't be, opposed to them spending, like you said, a day 1 or day 2 pick on a tackle if it's a guy that can push Spencer Brown. I do think a lot of people are down on Spencer Brown. I understand why. He didn't have a good year last year. He doesn't seem to be progressing. I think the Bills are way higher on him than we are as a fan base. And you kind of hear that in the way that Sean McDermott has spoken about him, Brandon Beane has spoken about him. Like, I'm not going to be surprised in the slightest if Spencer Brown is starting week 1, but bringing in competition, a real, true young competition that can compete with him, I'm not opposed to that in any way.
Yeah, and a lot of people are kind of, sort of in that same mindset as you, I would say. Like, I don't know that people are ready to pull the trigger on a round 1 tackle as far as like the comments section. We've got Les here saying linebacker, O-line is second for him, interior O-line, wide receiver. We've got Patrick saying linebacker, DL, and then the O-line. So he's kind of in line with you with putting O-line third. We've got Elizabeth here saying linebacker, D-line, right tackle. I can't really, I could get behind that. potentially as well. And then we got RJ coming in saying middle linebacker, right tackle, wide receiver 2, and then goes down the line. As far as fits, right? I mean, I think philosophically I agree with you, unless it's going to be someone that comes in, I think, in like clearly is in a class above Spencer Brown, then it's not worth taking that pick, right? Like I don't want to get into this limbo where you take like maybe like a round 3 guy and you're like, okay, well, he's going to come in and like maybe compete with Spencer Brown or maybe compete with Quessenberry to be the backup, or like not really have like a legitimate chance to push Spencer Brown in camp to be the starter. But if he plays really well and there's that outside chance, maybe he comes in, but then you have this like, oh, first time he struggles, they're going to like take him out and people are going to be clamoring for him to ride the pine. So I think for me, it's like, unless I'm taking the tackle round 1, like I'm fine waiting, and maybe even like waiting till day 3, honestly. But as far as the guys that has a lot of people's attention right now, obviously, Peter Skoronski was a name that Cover One guys were big on kind of putting content on him the last couple days. Obviously, the Bills had staff there at the Northwestern Pro Day. Darnell Wright is a really popular name right now amongst Bills Mafia. The boards have him a little bit all over the place. Some boards have him really high. Some boards have him kind of as a second rounder. He's a guy that I think a lot of Bills fans would be happy taking at pick 27. And then there are others, but is there any, 1 or 2 guys that you see as like good fits for the Bills? I didn't mention DeJuan Jones because I just don't think he's a fit for the Bills. But another guy like Anton Harrison, who I think is an athletic sort of prospect, I think he's a fit. There are a lot of good prospects, but there's only like a couple of the 3 or 4 top guys I feel like are actually fits for the Bills.
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying I'm not the biggest, college football guy. So just wanted to throw that out there so when I say something ridiculous, people aren't like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I fully admit I don't watch college football, don't pay as much attention to it as most. But I did do some research kind of leading up to this to see a few names that maybe were intriguing, or reading up on some players. One, I think Andrew Voorhees. I think it's Andrew, right? I know he's hurt.
Yeah,
He's out. He's not going to probably play this year at all. If you can get him in round 4, round 5 or something and stash him for next year, I'll sign up for that right now. The guy looks like he's a stud. I love that he went out on the crutches and did the bench on that. That's processed through and through. So that's a guy I'm interested in. And then one name way further down the list, because you mentioned a few of the other guys, and I think this would probably be a day 3 pick, Tyler Steen out of Alabama. So reading up on him, he's supposedly a great pass blocker. He's not really good against the run, but he's extremely athletic, which is something I look for in the right tackle for the Bills. That's why I like Spencer Brown. Josh always breaks to the right. He almost always breaks to the right when he's trying to escape pressure. So I need an athletic right tackle, and I need one that's better at pass blocking than Spencer Brown. Tyler Steen could be that player. Kind of goes contrary to what we were saying before. Like, don't waste a pick on a guy that's not going to beat Spencer Brown outright. But he's a guy I'm interested in kind of later in the draft.
Yeah. Athletic profile matches very much to the Bills archetype there. 6'5", 315. Came into Alabama in 2022. He was at Vandy from 2018 to 2021. Started 33 consecutive games for Vandy before he came to Alabama, and then started at left tackle for Alabama in 2022 and was second team all SEC from the league and coaches. Started all 13 games there. So good athletic profile. Obviously, big program, was a transfer from Vandy. So a good name to look at for the middle to the later rounds of the draft. There's a couple other good fits, I think, at tackle for the Bills. Another name people like is Blake Freeland. He tested off the charts, 9.82 RAS for him. Probably one of the biggest beneficiaries of the workout. Stole the show at the combine. Tested close to the top in almost every measurable there. Started all 13 games, as a third-team AP All-American, and was named the Independent Offensive Lineman of the Year by College Football Network. So another guy that kind of fits that athletic profile type that the Bills could be looking for it. As far as on the interior, this is where things get a little bit interesting because you start looking at these guys that have, center flex potentially as guys that maybe take a bit of a priority over others. I know who Charles mentioned Bergeron in the comments, and I think that for me, he's listed as a tackle. I could see him sliding into guard. John Michael Schmitz, who he mentions here, the very popular name at center. Joe Tippmann, another very popular name at center. So these are guys that, again, Tippmann is a guy that I saw in New York Upstate's article from today. They did a round table round one pick for the Bills, and like Ryan Talbot had his pick and a couple other guys had theirs, and one of the guys picked Joe Tippmann as his pick for the Bills in the first round, which I thought was really interesting because he's really risen up the boards in recent weeks. I do this interesting exercise each year where I take TDN's rankings from like early Feb to March to April to see how they kind of change. And Joe Tippmann is a guy that from February 2nd to March 20th has moved up 33 positions on the TDN overall prospect ranker. He was 71 back in February. He's now sitting there at 38 overall prospect for them. So a guy that's risen up the board and has that center, can play center. So I guess my question to you, Hansel, is I know, you self-admittedly are, not as into the college football stuff, but I'm going to ask you about the center position for the Bills and where do you see the future of the center position? Would you like to see the Bills invest in that in the draft sooner rather than later? Or are you kind of like, we'll worry about it when we get to, when it matters for Mitch Morse?
I think so. I'm under the impression Mitch Morse is playing this year. I've heard a couple people speculate he might retire. I don't think that that's true speculation. I think he's basically bought in, at least in the last interview I saw with him. I think the plan in the future is still Ryan Bates. I'm going to believe that until I don't see it. So I think the Bills essentially have their center on the roster, but it wouldn't hurt to bring in a guy that has guard, center, flex. If Ryan Bates doesn't pan out as the future at center, or maybe you even push Ryan Bates for his starting job at right guard. I think Connor McGovern probably locked in at least for this year and maybe in the future, depending on how he plays at left guard. But yeah, Mitch Morse is, his career, I don't think is going to span another half decade. He does have the concussion concerns. You look at him as a guy that has, I think, like 3 children. That weighs on his mind. He's talked about that before in interviews. I wouldn't be surprised if this is his last year. And if this isn't, it might be next year. Why not have a guy laying in wait that can play that position? And again, if it is Ryan Bates, then you have a hole at the other guard position. So if you have a guy that can fill there and you can get them in this draft, I have no issue with that at all.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation here with the center position for the Bills because you sign Connor McGovern. He's going to play left guard, but he's got that left guard, right guard, and he's played center. He's played over 100 snaps at center. We know Ryan Bates has played center. The Bills have insurance on the roster, and I'll call a worst case scenario for center and even backup should it come to that, right? I mean, and that's where I kind of think that like if it came down to it, maybe if they saw a guy that was center guard flex that they envisioned maybe could start out as a guard, or if they saw a guy that was a guard that was just going to be an absolute beast for 10 years, maybe they take the guy that is only a guard. That's not really their philosophy. They tend to like guys that are versatile. Judge and I get into this conversation a lot where it's like, would you rather have like a slightly lesser player who is versatile, or would you rather have a stud who only plays one position? And it's a really interesting conversation. And for me, when it comes to the offensive line, it's nice having that versatility, but when you have 10 guys, maybe 9 or 10 guys on the 53, I want my depth to be versatile, but I really want my starters to be studs. And so if that means like my starting guard is a stud, but he can't play center, okay, I'll have a backup center. Like that's just me philosophically, but others may disagree. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah.
Kind of,
It's funny you say that because I actually have this in my notes. This is when I was looking through all the prospects. One thing that kind of turned me off when I saw it on players was position flexibility, which goes counter to what the Bills want. The Bills always look at position flexibility, but kind of like what you were saying, I want a guy that's a right guard that can play right guard and is one of the top 15 right guards in the NFL. I don't care if he can't play center. I don't care if he can't move over to left guard or can't play tackle. If he's a top 15 right guard, sign me up today. So when I see all these position flexibilities, or even more so position questions, we talked about Peter Skoronski, right? There's
Hmm.
talk about maybe he has to push inside, or you
Yep.
have a Cody Mock, maybe he has to push inside. That
Yep.
starts to worry me because
Yep.
you look at these guys that have always played outside, and now you're like, hey, by the way, we might want to move you inside. There's some concern I have there that they just can't make that move. It's not as easy as just being like, oh, I'm going to take my right tackle and make him my right guard. Like that doesn't work always. It's a
Hmm.
different position, it's a different skill set. So it does make me a little bit concerned when I see those big name players with questions about what their NFL position is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a guy that the Bills had drafted in the past, Cordy Glenn. That was the big conversation around
Mm,
Cordy Glenn when he was drafted. Is he going to be the Bills tackle, or is he going to be slide inside the guard? A lot of the draft analysts at the time thought that he was going to be better suited to slide inside at guard. I mean, his career started out pretty well. The Bills obviously made out pretty good in that trade when they traded from. But his career has really kind of like, I don't want to say it's sputtered out, but it hasn't certainly been, um, you know filled with highlights, I'll say. So look, it's a tough scenario there, but for me, I'd rather have in that situation. I don't want to draft a tackle and then have to be questioned like, oh, is he going to slide inside the guard? Because then you automatically off the bat you feel like you're losing value in the
yep.
pick, right? Because it just. But if you're talking about a center who maybe starts as a guard and then can go back to center, like that to me is like a more natural and I could justify kind of that. Uh, yeah, Randy says you should not be investing high picks in tweeners, and I agree with that. Versatility, depth for versatility, starters, and if a starter that's a stud and has versatility, that's like a super rare type of player. So,
Mhm.
um, look, that's how I feel about that. So, uh, continuing the trend on the offense, let's talk about a position that a lot of people are interested in right now. And we'll talk a little bit about DeAndre Hopkins watch, Odell Beckham watch, wide receiver position for the Bills. And I think a lot of people are interested in what is wide receiver 2, or really is there going to be another wide receiver added to this group before the draft, during the draft, after the draft? There's a lot of good wide receiver prospects in this draft. For me, Jackson Smith and Jigba is my number 1. My number 2 wide receiver right now is Zay Flowers, which is somewhat against consensus, but I just absolutely love him. Watching the ACC a lot here in BC. Um, Look, BC hasn't been known for their offense. Okay. And this guy is an absolute stud. In any case, wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins watch. Is this happening or not? Like at this point, you saw Brandon Beane come out today and basically kind of throw water on it a bit. But maybe it's smoke, right? Maybe it's a smoke screen. So what do you think this is going to happen? Do you think this DeAndre Hopkins thing's going to happen?
I think the Bills, my theory, and I have nothing to back this up, but my theory is the Bills and Hopkins had an agreement, and the Cardinals were privy to this agreement of what the trade was going to be. The Cardinals did not like the compensation, said, well, we can go get more compensation, went, searched around, and realized they're not going to get what they want. So then today they say to Hopkins, all right, we're going to let you go talk to whoever you want. You just have to come back with the package we want, and then we're going to let you go. They're not going to get the package they want. They essentially don't want to pay him anything and want a day 2 pick and day 2 pick and maybe a player in the trade as well. It'd be insane to do. I know people are like, he's DeAndre Hopkins. He's also above 30 and he's getting paid a lot of money. Like, there's a point where he's going to start to tail off. I'm not saying he is right now. I actually think if the Bills brought in DeAndre Hopkins, they're significantly better than they were last year. But at the same time, I brought up earlier, like these picks that the Bills have are so valuable because they're so cap strapped in the future that giving up multiple picks or giving up early picks on players that will make your roster or are almost guaranteed to make your roster is dangerous for someone like Hopkins. If I had to put like a percent on will this happen, geez, I think I'd probably say 15% chance he comes to Buffalo. And I don't think that this trade happens probably until we're a month out from the draft. So I'm saying probably 25 days from now is when this trade would happen.
Yeah, we saw it last year, 2 day 1 draft day trades for wide receivers, right? Hollywood Brown got traded on draft night, and AJ Brown got traded on draft night. And obviously those guys were on, rookie contracts, young, cost controlled. Obviously Hollywood Brown got his 5th-year option exercise. The Eagles gave AJ Brown that extension, but this is a little bit of a different situation, right? As you mentioned, DeAndre Hopkins, I think he's 31 years old. I could be wrong. He might be 32. The money is the main probably sticking point here. The Bills saying, look, we have only certain cap number we want to work with here. And it's like this, right? If you're the Cardinals or if you're the Bills, if you're a team trading for DeAndre Hopkins, it comes down to, are we more willing to give up cap space or draft capital? And in the Bills situation, I think that they're probably more willing to give up draft capital if the Cardinals ate a huge portion of that cap number, right? Of that dollar number. And the reason I say that is because of the cap situation the Bills are in, and also because I think now with Brandon Beane expecting and fully anticipating having that comp pick next year, that 3rd round pick next year, he might be more willing to say, hey, Cardinals, you're not getting a day 1 or day 2 pick for DeAndre Hopkins, okay, in a deal, unless you eat a ton of his dollars. So guess what? We're the Bills. We'll give you a 3rd round pick this year, but you're going to eat basically all of those dollars. And I feel like in that type of compromise where maybe neither team feels like they won, then it's a good deal, right? Because that's the age old saying, right? And when neither side feels happy, then it was a good deal. What the Bills might be willing to do that more so knowing that they got that comp pick coming next year, if the Cardinals are willing to eat all that cap space. Again, that's just my kind of theory I'm playing out in my head, but I think I'm with you. I think the further this thing goes along, I think the less chance it is of happening until we get to draft day, and then it might spike, or like a couple days before draft day, then it might spike up again if he hasn't been moved by then. But I think the Cardinals at this point realize the value that they can get from him, at least right now on March 27th, is probably at an all-time low. So what do the Cardinals have to gain by trading him now? They might as well wait until it gets closer to the draft, or even during the draft, to try to see if they can find a team that might be getting a little bit of that, trigger finger and want to make that deal. So we've got a comment here from No Thanks Hot Take, but releasing Gabe Davis right now is pretty easy. He's solid too, and just isn't that dude. Take advantage. Obviously, the Digs still love him, but he is what he is. And that's another part of this equation, right? Is Gabe Davis beyond 2023? Do you see Gabe Davis on this team beyond 2023?
No, he's going to get paid too much elsewhere, and that's the funniest part about this debate, right? With a lot of Bills fans, is they're like, he's not very good, but he's going to get paid too much next year to be able to stay on the Bills. It's like, why is he going to get paid so much next year? Because he's actually pretty good. Like, he's a solid wide receiver too. But no, I don't see him on this team next year.
And I would think that if a trade does happen for D-Hop, then he's assuredly gone, right? I mean, Randy says it here, right? I get wanting a bona fide second number 1, but really I think it's a hard fit. Virtually guarantees Gabe walks next year. And Randy's right with that comment. And he says it would be more prudent to draft 1 day 2 as the heir apparent to Gabe and let it play out. And so thank you, Randy, for creating the segue for me. Early wide receiver draft prospects. And what traits are you looking for? Because I was in agreement with Randy on social media earlier. My traits that I'm looking for in wide receivers this year are separators and guys that can make plays after the catch, right? And I don't necessarily care how big or small these guys are. I want good route runners. I want good separators. I want guys that are good, that have quickness, maybe more so than straight line speed. because I think that meshes the best with what Josh Allen does well. And that's why I love guys like Zay Flowers and Tyler Scott from Cincinnati. Like, these are the types of guys that I'm really interested in. I'm not saying I want tiny dudes, but these guys are like 5'10, 5'11, 6 feet tall. Like, they're not small. So are there, like, I'll put it to you this way. If the Bills don't trade for D-Hop, we know they have a glaring need at middle linebacker. We're going to get to that next. We know they have a need at right tackle. What happens if a Jackson Smith and Jigba is there at 27? Like, would the Bills be dumb to pass on him at that point? Would the Bills be dumb to pass on a Zay Flowers or a Quentin Johnson? Like, where are you valuing wide receiver, presuming the Bills don't make a trade for Hopkins or sign Odell, I should say, as well?
So wide receivers, my number 3 need. But if Jackson Smith and Jigba is there at 27, the Bills don't take him, I'm going to lose my mind. Like, he's the perfect piece. Like, we just talked about DeAndre Hopkins. If I had to pick between DeAndre Hopkins and Jackson Smith at the same cost, say they had the same exact cap hit, I don't want DeAndre Hopkins. I want Jackson. And the reason being is he's a uber version of Cole Beasley. Like, he's so much better in the slot than Cole Beasley was. And that's the piece the Bills have been missing since the start of last year. Like, they need a slot receiver. I think if the Bills had a true slot, a true guy that could constantly be open, was that pressure release valve for Josh Allen, then people would love Gabe Davis, because Gabe Davis would be open a lot more, making a lot more big plays. They just don't have that guy underneath. So Allen's airing it out 50 yards downfield every play. Jackson solves that. Like, he literally solves that problem. So he is my dream draft pick. Like, he's the one I want. They're not going to get him. He's going to go before the 27.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the middle round receivers, I'll say second, third round receivers, are really intriguing to me, right? Jackson probably going to be gone, like you mentioned, but Zay Flowers, Josh Downs. I know Eric Turner is super high on Josh Downs. Like, is Josh Downs a guy that you'd be willing to pull the trigger on at 27 if you knew you could get like a Jack Campbell or Trenton Simpson at pick 59? Like, I might, like, I honestly might, if that was the case, but it just depends on where the Bills kind of value this position if they're not able to make that trade. Now, the fact that they want or have been linked to making this trade shows me that they're serious about making an upgrade. So that's where I kind of say, like, hey, wide receiver with that first round pick shouldn't be off the table right now.
Yeah, and further to that point is, we just talked about Gabe Davis probably gone next year. You then go look at this wide receiver core and you're like, well, who are they going to have next year? Like, Trent Sherfield came on a 1-year deal. Deontay Harty, he could be back next year. We'll see what he is. We have literally no idea what he is. There's an easy out with him. So at that point, you could, in theory, have Stephon Diggs and Khalil Shakir as your only wide receivers. That's not good enough. So investing in a wide receiver in late day 1, early day 2, if maybe you have to move up, to get a Zay Flowers in round 2. Maybe he falls to that spot and you're like, all right, we got to go get that guy. I have no issue with that. And I think the Bills do need youth at that position. That's one of my concerns with Hopkins. You bring him in, you created a window at that point, right? You only have a year or two with him and Diggs playing at a high level. And again, you have all these cap issues. You need some youth. And that's where, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers. And like you said, Eric's really high on Josh Downs. I watched some route running he had. And I guess the Steelers said it was the most crisp pro day they've ever been to. Like, that guy, he does run pretty crisp routes. And that's something I think Josh Allen would love to have on this team.
Josh Downs, like, you talk about route runners in this draft class, Josh Downs is up there. I mean, Jaden Reed is really picking up steam since the Senior Bowl. TDN had him as their 147 overall prospect on February 2nd. They have him all the way up to 79 now. So really, they have him just outside sort of round 2 as far as overall, up 68 spots for them. Tyler Scott, who Randy mentioned in the comments section, is really one of my favorites in this draft from Cincinnati. He's a guy that is an elite separator. He can also stretch the field. He's not necessarily like the super burner, but he is athletic. He has an 8.3 RAS. And I think he's a fit. Like, to me, like, he's a stouter version of body type like a stouter John Brown. Like he's that type of height and weight, but he just looks more stout than John Brown. Tyler Scott is a guy I really like as well. So there are other guys. Judge is big on Cedric Tillman. Again, bigger sort of outside boundary guy, but I'm looking for guys that can separate. I'm looking for guys that can run routes really well. And Randy says the Great White Hope, Charlie Jones. Yeah, there's so many guys. Now, we're not going to get too deep into the weeds on draft talk tonight because our next 3 shows after this are all going to be drafts. So next week's going to be day 3 targets, the week after day 2, day 1, and then the draft. So we're going to round out the show tonight with maybe arguably the position of most importance, or appears to be of most importance to Bills fans right now. And that's the middle linebacker spot, right? We lose Tremaine Edmunds to free agency. Tremaine Edmunds, the reason we are looking at, A.T. Perry, good call, Charles. Tremaine Edmunds, the reason we are looking at that potential 3rd round comp pick next year and losing a guy like that. Glaring hole in the defense. The Bills really haven't addressed the linebacker position other than bringing back their own guys like Dodson and Matakevich. Bean came out today and said they want Spector and Dodson to compete with a young guy there. And obviously the Bills signed Taylor Rapp today, who maybe in certain situations, depending on this defense that they want to deploy this year, could be a pseudo linebacker. But Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano are kind of like the penciled in starting linebackers for this, base 2 linebacker defense that the Bills run. How high is that Mike linebacker for you on your needs list right now heading into the draft? Is it paramount that the Bills go after a guy early, or are you kind of like by committee okay with what they're kind of preaching right now, or what Brandon Bead said today?
Yeah, so I've defended Terrell Bernard nonstop this offseason. Probably too much, to be honest. I still think that Mike linebacker is the number 1 need in this draft. Like, they have to address this. And the main reason I say that is because they don't have the archetype on their roster that Sean McDermott has in that position his entire career. He had Luke Kuechly and he had Tremaine Edmunds, both over 6'3", which is a huge, huge thing that goes into this, right? You have all these kind of, like, I forgot Bernard's exact height. He's not 6'3". They need a big guy with long arms in the middle of that defense because of this zone scheme they run. They need a guy that can basically clog up the middle of the field just with his size. And I think that I only found 3 guys that fit that 6'3" and up kind of requirement for me, let's say, at the linebacker position in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows you how much of a freak Tremaine Edmunds was, like, physically. Like, it's absolutely absurd, like, what he is physically. And so, look, there's not a linebacker in this class that is even on the same, athletic or I would say potential that Tremaine Edmunds had in the draft that he was in. I mean, you're not going to see, I don't think, a middle linebacker getting picked in the top 16 in this draft, but the guys that probably stand out the most are Jack Campbell, who Eric's done a lot of really good film work on, and Drew Sanders from Arkansas are the 2 guys that really stand out to me as maybe the closest thing you're going to get to a potential Tremaine Edmunds replacement. Jack Campbell being the guy that is probably more ready to come in from day 1 and be the guy that, can quickly process and kind of step into that role, right away. And Drew Sanders is kind of the wild card, right? The athletic freak, 6'5", 230. And he's a guy that if the Bills want to take a chance on an athletic profile for a guy who doesn't necessarily have the technique or experience that a guy like Jack Campbell does, then maybe Drew Sanders comes into the mix. But there's really not that guy. Trenton Simpson's another one who, a lot of people like, but there's just not Tremaine Edmunds in this draft. So if you're hoping for it, I mean, he's not there. And this is where, like, a really fun debate comes in on social media is like, what do the Bills do at pick 27? I mean, do they just go ahead and take their guy there? Do they try to squeeze some value out of maybe trying to trade down with someone and hope that they can still land a linebacker? There's always the risk involved there that they don't get the guy that they want. And there's also there's got to be a trade partner, right? Willing to come up and come into there. So like, would you be mad if the Bills took a Jack Campbell or a Drew Sanders at pick 27?
I wouldn't be mad because again, like this is if I go and look at their roster right now, their roster's really good. It's a better roster this year than it was last year, minus middle linebacker. Like outside of that, this roster is significantly better than it was last year, in my opinion. And so you have one hole on this team and you need to address it. If you have to reach for a player, reach for that player if you think he's the guy that's going to be able to fill those shoes. But one thing I think the Bills know, and maybe is kind of upsetting for fans to hear, is the second Tremaine Edmonds signed with the Bears, the Bills were going to downgrade no matter what at middle linebacker this year. The second he signed with the Bears, there's no chance they're going to upgrade at this position in 2023. And so I think they just need a guy that maybe can progress to Edmonds level at some point in his career, but knowing that this season they're going to see a little less, production at that position.
Yeah, and Charles says if they like Campbell, take him at 27. Randy's obviously concerned about, Sanders being more of a project, and I understand that. But the Bills, I mean, Greg Rousseau had 1 year of production at Miami and then sat out, that season, the COVID season, and the Bills still went and picked him at pick 30 or whatever it was. So, like, I can't rule it out that they would take a guy like Drew Sanders just because of his athletic profile, even if he is a project. Now, I will say the circumstances are not the same. So before Randy gets on me for that, Gregory Rousseau was coming to a situation where he didn't have to be the man from day one. Whereas if Drew Sanders came in, like, there would be a pretty high expectation that he'd have to be the man there from day one. And I don't know that that is something the Bills want to do. However, Jack Campbell being from Iowa, the Bills have obviously had a strong connection to Iowa in the past. They've picked AJ Epinesa. They've obviously signed Micah Hyde. Sean McDermott's close with that Iowa coaching staff. That could be an option for them, Jack Campbell at 27. Maybe it's too early, but again, if the Bills want their guy, they're not going to be afraid to take them. And yes, Claude, yep, Greg Rousseau wouldn't have to call the defense. I get that. So look, it's not the same situation. I'm just saying, like, there's some loose connections you can make there. So that's probably where we'll end for tonight. We're not going to get into every other position. We're going to save that for the next couple weeks, go through our day 3, day 2, and day 1 sort of fits. Can he wrestle? Yeah, that's always the number one question. If the answer is yes, then he's on the Bills board for sure. So some final thoughts for tonight. Number one, the Bills have done a pretty good job in summary, I think, of filling holes and getting value in free agency this time around. And I made the comment on social media like about a week ago that I think this might have been Brandon Beane's toughest offseason cycle to date. And I'm saying even tougher than when he first came in and clearing cap and all that, because at that point, there weren't the expectations on this team like there are now. And this cycle has been tough, dealing with fan expectations, dealing with a little bit of impatience, I would say, from all of us to an extent, right? At different degrees. Like, this fan base is hungry for a ring, and each year that goes by that it doesn't happen, the impatience does creep in. So Beane's done a really good job of being patient through this cycle, I think, and getting value and giving us that position to be in line for that comp pick next year. So I got to commend him. I think he's done a great job this cycle, where a lot of people might be giving him crap because he didn't make that splashy move necessarily. I think it may be one of his best cycles. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you just look at some of the players, like the one that stands out to me the most, where you can look at and say, wow, Beane got a massive amount of value, is Damian Harris. Like, they got him for $1.7 million. They got him under the comp formula. And to your point, he had such little to work with this season, and he has so much, like, he has to do. There's so much expectations. Why did this team fall flat in years past? I need to improve on certain spots, but I don't have the money to go get a Von Miller this year. And so what Brandon Beane's done this year is he's gone and got, B and C list players that make this team better. Like the Bills are better at a lot of spots right now than they were last year. And I commend Brandon Beane for that because he made a already elite roster. Like make no mistake about it. The Bills roster is elite. They went 13-3 for a reason. And they're probably going to go about that again this year. He's making that roster better. That's impressive. But the problem is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if they can't win the ring. So I do think that there's still a hole or two left they're going to have to address, whether that be in the draft or maybe a couple more free agent picks. But Beane's done a really, really good job so far.
Yeah, and I'm really excited that for this cycle, we aren't having to talk about the defensive backfield for the draft as much as we've had in the past 2-3 years. And that, because like it's always been like corner. Like that's all we've kind of really not all, but like a lot of our talk on the draft has been about corner the last couple of years. So that defensive backfield this year, and you mentioned it, McDermott being one of the best defensive backs mind coaches in the league, like this defensive backfield, he's not messing around this year. Like he saw what happened last year when guys went out, and he's like, I'm going to do everything in my power to not make that happen this year. And man, this defensive backfield looks like it's going to be humming this year. So Hansel, thank you for joining me tonight and sharing your thoughts. Comment section, thank you. I love our comment section. Super knowledgeable about everything going on in Bills land, draft, otherwise. Lot of regulars in here tonight, and I really like to see that. Let's all wish Judge the best of luck tonight as he goes through that wait, and hopefully it'll happen sooner rather than later, welcoming his baby girl into the world soon. And we'll see. He'll probably be back for the next show because that's just who he is. And let's wish him the best. And, let's give him our thoughts tonight. And this show is for him. Hansel, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, you guys really do have the best show, and just kind of hopping with what you said earlier about Judge. Like I only started doing stuff like this, being on video, talking about the Bills more often because of Judge. He invited me on the first ever show I did now a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I thank him for that literally every time I come on a show like this. So I'm wishing the best to Judge, and again, love this show. I think it's one of the best, if not the best, Bills shows there are.
Well, I appreciate that. And we appreciate the comments section sticking with us. This is one of our favorite times of the year, the draft. So, next week we'll be breaking down our day 3 targets, and we'll go to day 2 and day 1, like I said, leading right up to draft night. And cover 1, I'll be putting out our schedule of content for draft weekend here pretty soon. In the next couple days or week or so, we'll let you guys know exactly what we've got lined up for draft weekend as far as content and shows and film rooms and all different things. Eric will be on the film for the guys that we draft right away. That's just how he is. We've got film stuff lined up for D-Hop if that thing actually happens, ready to go. So we appreciate it. We appreciate all of you guys in the comments section. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.